welcome into another episode of Be Conscious. I'm Damien Barling, sports, race, and social issues columnist from the New York Daily News. Carron J Phillips is going to join us here shortly. I can't thank you enough for tuning in today, and can't thank you enough for tuning into this podcast and giving it a shot. We've gotten off to a fantastic start. Thank you so much to all those who have subscribed, rated, and reviewed us. We're still pretty young in the process, and this thing is growing each week, and it's growing because of you. When you subscribe and rate us, the various platforms take notice, and it exposes the show to more people. Really enjoyed having Barry Axius in the studio with me last week. That was the first time we had ever told the story of the Golden One Center protest while sitting in the same room as each other. So it was cool to get the vibe as to what he was thinking that night, as to what I was thinking, as to what he was thinking when we first encountered each other. So it's one of the more fun episodes that we've had in the young history of Be Conscious. If you want to go back and hear that, or the conversation with Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Wesley Lowery, or author of The Heritage, Howard Bryant, you can go check out all of those in the archives. If you want to connect or share your feedback, good or bad, at Damien Barling on Twitter, or dbarling, B-A-R-L-I-N-G, at saclocalmedia.com. I even started an Instagram page devoted to Be Conscious. You can find that at Be Conscious Pod on Instagram. Clips of the show, videos, quotes, all sorts of stuff available there on Instagram. Again, that's at Be Conscious Pod. Before Carron joins us, I wanted to give you a peek at what we've got ahead. I just started a book called White Fragility. It's by Dr. Robin DiAngelo, and I just got confirmation from her publisher that she's going to be able to join us for next week's episode of Be Conscious. Now, Dr. DiAngelo is white, and the book is about why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. I'm very, very young into the book, but it's really an extraordinary read so far. It's a quick little book, like a day-long read. And the timing of the book is perfect, given we just saw another incident of a white person, specifically a white woman, calling the police on a black person, specifically a 9-year-old girl, she first claimed because the girl was selling water without a permit. Then she claimed it was because she kept yelling, "Water, $2, and it was bothering her. Then she said she didn't actually call the cops. She was pretending, which actually strikes me as far worse than anything else, because she was pretending because she wanted to scare an 8-year-old black girl into thinking that the cops were coming. Now, as usual, if you lower yourself to reading the comment section of social media posts or newspaper articles, you'll see people, specifically white people, defend her actions and stamp anyone who says otherwise as a race baiter. Race makes white people uncomfortable. Somehow race conversations, they're labeled as politics now. And when politics come into play, you're told to shut up and dribble or stick to whatever it is you do. Just get off this subject immediately, which is what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to finish this book up, and we're going to have Dr. Robin DiAngelo join us next week. I'd like to welcome in Carron J Phillips. He's a columnist for the New York Daily News who covers everything from sports to race and social issues. Carron, very happy to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
You're born in Michigan?
Saginaw, yep.
Spartans or Wolverines guy?
Wolverines, man. I don't root for that community college at East Lansing.
Wow. Okay. Shots fired here in the first couple minutes of the show. Appreciate it. So, no, the reason I asked you that is because I was hoping you would say Michigan, because, you know, you write about the intersect of race and social issues and sports as well. And I was curious. I was listening to a conversation Chris Webber had earlier this week with Dan Patrick. And I don't know if you got a chance to hear that, but he had mentioned how Bill Walton had called the Fab Five thugs. And I was curious if you had ever thought about, like, dissecting the racial component to the Fab Five in college basketball.
I mean, like, where do you want to start with that? Like, that was my childhood. Let's go back to 93 when they lost to Carolina. I was 9 when it happened. Mm-hmm. And you remember the ESPN 30 for 30 Fab Five document they did?
Oh, of course.
And they showed the timeout scene. Like, I was a grown man, and I, like, teared up. Like, that's how much that still hurts. Because that's like every sports fan has like this one heartbreaking memory when you're young, where you really learn like how much it hurts or how great it feels when your team wins or loses. Well, my first like crippling loss was that like when the Chris Webber timeout that year.
Mm-hmm.
But and I said that to give you like a landscape of being a black kid growing up in Michigan at that time and knowing the history of that school and seeing two dudes from Chicago, two dudes from Detroit, one from Chicago and two from Texas, like taking over the campus while we also had like Desmond Howard on the football side. And yes, while I wasn't aware that Walton said that, I'm not surprised because the biggest critic I remember of them at that time was Bobby Knight. Bobby Knight literally hated the Fab Five and what they stood for. And while Bobby Knight was right, his criticism of saying like they never won anything, because that's the funny tidbit Jeopardy question about the Fab Five that people don't realize. Like they never actually won anything. But the way they changed the culture of college basketball and basketball in general and the things that they accomplished, words like thugs and other hidden racist terms that people like to use to describe black people, I am not surprised by Bill Walton saying that at all.
Yeah, and one thing that you mentioned the cultural impact that they've had and the fact that they didn't win anything. I relate the Fab Five a lot to Allen Iverson, because Allen Iverson went into the Hall of Fame the same year, I think it was Shaquille O'Neal did. And we had a conversation about who meant more to basketball, and I was arguing that Allen Iverson did, because Allen Iverson.
No, it's not even close. Is that why is that even an argument?
Right, he had a greater cultural impact than Shaquille O'Neal did.
I love Shaq. Like Shaq's my second. I think Shaq's I take that back. No, second best center ever, behind Kareem. Just because the physical specimen he is. But, like, we talking about Allen Iverson. Like, I've been in suites at the Wells Fargo Center on multiple occasions where he's had fans in there and he's told stories. And to see, I've never seen a guy really own a city like that.
Yeah.
Besides, like, Magic Johnson in L.A. and what Magic means to L.A. and the Hollywood feel of it. But when you go to Philly and you know real Philly people and you know real Philly fans, like there's literally nothing Allen Iverson could ever do where Philly wouldn't love him in the way that he's embraced for from the braids to the tattoos to the arm sleeves to the shoes to the crossover that he stopped doing. I remember everyone just learning how to do a crossover just because of the Allen Iverson Reebok commercial.
Right.
Like we forgot that Tim Hardaway crossover might have even been better. And it only happened like a couple of years before. But that dude's imprint on basketball is still felt today. And while Shaq is great and outstanding, like what did Shaq do that ever changed the game of basketball?
Right. Other than the way that he maybe changed the way big men were officiated, in that it feels like guys Shaquille O'Neal size, the Dwight Howards, the DeMarcus Cousins, they might be officiated a little different. But there's no cultural impact to Shaquille O'Neal, and I think the impact that Allen Iverson has. My Allen Iverson story is always the same. I only have one, and I was at the peak of Iverson Mania or whatever it was called. He was here in Sacramento. I was working on the FM side at a hip hop station, and we were doing a nightclub, and it was one of those things where Allen Iverson was going to show up, and sure enough, at like 12:55 that night, Iverson comes walking in, man, and I had never seen more 21 to 28-year-old males. Like I'm telling you, Carron, they lost their mind. I've never seen anything like that before.
It's still the same feel though. Like that still happens in this kind. I wrote a column last year about the Big Three and like why I don't think it will last. And part of it has to do with injury. Another part has to do with how are they going to keep replacing talent every season. But when your biggest draw was Allen Iverson and he stopped coming to games, and he's not involved at all this year, like you lose a lot of your luster because when that dude showed up, like people feel the seas.
Now, I mentioned during your introduction that talking about race and racism, it makes people, specifically white people, uncomfortable. Have you found that to be the case in your writing career?
Always the case. When you bring it up in conversation with, and personally, or if you're writing about it, or TV, or any form of media that you're expressing the topic or commenting on it, it's going to ruffle feathers. It's going to make people a little squirmy in their chairs, but it's supposed to. And that's the thing about change and about progress. Like, a lot of people have this idea that in order for things to get better, like, there's this smooth process to it. And that's just not true. As we're in the middle of this big civility talk that we have in this country right now, like, no, that's not how this goes. Like, it has to get uncomfortable. It has to get real bothersome, to use that word, if it even works here, for people to start reflecting and taking a step back and realizing on some of their mindsets and theologies that may be flawed for things to get changed. So, like, yeah, but in this job and in things I've done before and places I've been before writing about this, like, it gets to a point where I'm pretty numb to it. The criticism that comes to it, I'm speaking of, because I'm here to serve a purpose. And if your feelings get a little hurt, I'm cool with that.
You mentioned you're numb to the criticism from it. So what's the biggest struggle when writing about race relations, particularly here in 2018?
That's a good question. And, like, I don't really look at it as a struggle. Like, it's just a need, and there's a void that needs to be filled. And with this position and with my educational background and my experience in this industry, I just happen to fall into a great position to where I have this position to be this columnist at this publication that supports me and wants me to attack these issues. So I don't really look at it as like a burden, or like sometimes if something really bad happens, do I need to have a drink at the end of the night? And it was a long day. Like, of course. But it's not really something that boggles me down. Like a couple months ago, like, I'm trying to think of, like, the last tough day was the day the NFL anthem policy came out.
Okay.
If you actually go back and watch the tape of the press conference, you will see, like, this tall black dude sitting in the front row. And that's me. And I'm sitting dead in front of Roger Goodell. Because I live in Atlanta and I was down here covering it. Mm-hmm. But I also knew the Sterling Brown tape was coming, and we hadn't seen it.
Right.
A couple hours later, the Sterling Brown tape comes out, and I had been telling my boss, I'm not writing about the anthem policy until the Brown tape comes out, because this is all intertwined. And, like, someone has to speak to how both of them are, like, joined at the hip. And then I remember waiting on it all day, and about, like, 6 o'clock, around 7, it finally got released. And that was just the magnitude of this, the biggest sports league in the country coming out with this policy, and them being so dumb and naive and ignorant that this tape was also being released this same day and not even caring and not even understanding why players were protesting. It was just kind of it was a situation where it was just kind of, you just want to bang your head and be like, how can y'all be so stupid? But then you have to understand it's not necessarily that they're stupid. It's just they just don't care, and this is who they really are.
And that's one of the amazing things about all of this when you watch the social issues and political issues and all of that stuff bleeding into sports now. When stuff like that happens, you gave those two instances that happened on the same exact day. And it's just an exclamation point as to the NBA is so far ahead of the NFL when it comes to stuff like this. And so many people are asked the question why, and we've talked about this a million times on the sports side of the show, is that the NFL, I don't think the NFL wants like a star. Like, they want to be the star. They want the shield to be the star. The game of football is the star. They don't need a face of the league. The NBA operates off faces of the league. They operate off of LeBron James and Chris Paul, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, those type of guys. And so Adam Silver has tended to give those guys the freedom to talk about the stuff that's important to them. At least that's how I see it.
But here's the thing about that, and what you said is correct, because, like, Jalen Rose has that quote he's been saying, is that the NFL values the shield, and that's their logo, and the NBA has Jerry West as their logo because they value the players. But just reading a story from how at the New York City Pride Parade, how like the NBA had a float and Adam Silver is all on there, and how they've been at the front of the LGBTQ conversation and this whole social issues thing. But here's the thing, and like you just said, that the NBA is so far ahead of the NFL. But my question is, are they really, or do they just look so far ahead because the NFL is so far behind? Because if we think about this and be honest, the NBA had their policy that you had to stand for the anthem since the 90s and how they blackballed Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't forget that. And while we have seen the league be progressive, and it helps that you have a LeBron and a Kevin Durant who won't shut up and dribble, and you have a Greg Popovich and a Steve Kerr who are also always challenging the president and the Warriors, who are the darlings of the league. And you have a guy who white America and middle America loves to embrace, like Steph Curry, taking a stand. But when you look at that rule that the NBA has, and the fact that no one still has not challenged it, and we also had Donald Sterling a couple of years back.
Yeah.
Like, I appreciate the NBA for what they are, but don't get it twisted. Like, the NBA does have some issues, but when you compare them to the NFL, like, they look flawless. But when you kind of get the microscope out and look at that diamond, you can see a lot of scratches.
It's a couple of things worth following up on there. You mentioned Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, and another name that I don't think people associate with potentially being blackballed is Craig Hodges.
Yeah, and even I forgot about him that quick. Like, Craig Hodges went to the White House with a list of demands, and we ain't seen that man since.
Right. That's 100% accurate. He tried to get Jordan on board, and Jordan, as we all know, he wasn't having it. And as you said, we haven't seen the dude since. But
also to add to that, like, for anyone who's listening who might be like, well, Craig Hodges wasn't a star. This is how good Craig Hodges was at shooting three-pointers that kids love to shoot so much today. That dude didn't play for half a season, still got invited to the three-point contest and won it.
Yeah.
That's how good Craig Hodges was.
Yeah, man.
So it wasn't just like some bum that they blackballed out the league.
How do you think, and I think this ties into the whole conversation about those two players. You mentioned the Donald Sterling situation and where we are now. How do you think, whether it's anthem demonstrations or I Can't Breathe T-shirts or the Donald Sterling situation would be handled if David Stern was still in charge?
See, that's where it gets tricky, because while we praise David Stern for making the game global and taking it to China and making this product that used to be looked at, this game that only black players play, and made it international and made everyone love it, like, you do your research on on David Stern, and some things pop up where you kind of just like the one and done rule. Like, let's really be honest. We know what the one and done rule is about.
Mm-hmm.
Like, like, Stern didn't like all these young black dudes coming and getting paid and skipping out, and you were pushing old dudes out the league. So he implemented this rule, because there wasn't really, I don't know of any white one-and-done players that were doing this or leaving straight from high school. And that is a whole nother conversation we can have about socioeconomics and race and sports and all that itself. But that is a very good question to ask, because if we've seen, while Silver has been to quickly address issues, Stern was a little bit more old school. So if this happened now, like, I would be really, really interested to see how he will handle it.
Yeah, and to bring this,
because I'm not too keen to believe that it would be the same way that Silver would.
And to bring this entire conversation, this first part of the conversation full circle, the dress code that David Stern implemented.
Iverson.
Exactly, the Allen Iverson rule. Was there a specific moment that you saw that happened that made you want to write about race and social issues?
I think it started, with like Ferguson. It was when I really started writing about social issues. I was at the News Dispatch in Michigan City, Indiana, and I was assistant sports editor, and I had to write a column every Sunday. But when you're covering like local sports, like, it's not really not really that much material there all the time. So I would tie in like national sports or things that I liked. But I remember Ferguson happened, and I had a lot of friends who were journalists that were there, and I kind of wrote this column dedicated to them, saying that like I appreciate the people who are risking their lives to tell the story. Mm-hmm. And then from there, it kind of went on, and things started to happen. And then I went to left and got a new job and started to, break these things down a little bit more. And as we saw, as I like to point out to people all the time, the world changed in 2016 in November on election night.
Yeah.
And all hell kind of broke loose. And then especially in 2016 is when Kaepernick started. Mm-hmm. And they're pretty much began to be like a line drawn in the sand, and you could see who was about what and who wasn't. And I never had that fear of being one of the first ones to be like, oh, I'm going to tackle this beat single-handedly. This is what I want to do because there's something here. And now you're seeing it and you're having this conversation where media companies and publication, I was like, do we talk about politics and sports or do we do not? And I'm kind of like, you kind of have to, because there's this guy in D.C. who's made it impossible not to.
Yeah.
And if you don't discuss it, you're also kind of not doing your job because the athletes are discussing it. So you have to as well if you're going to cover them. So if that was kind of the moment that kind of started it, but after Ferguson, it kind of just got all muddled. And before I knew it, I was just kind of like all in.
Yeah, Ferguson, when we talked to Wesley Lowery on this podcast just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I mentioned him in that column. Like, he got arrested and all that, and he was one of the people like I named.
Yeah, absolutely, and it wasn't the birth of Black Lives Matter, as I think that could be traced back to Trayvon Martin, but it was kind of the explosion of Black Lives Matter, and once that happened, that's when, that intersect that you talked about, that there really was no more intersection. It was all blended together once Black Lives Matter happened. And then, of course, the election in 2016 and the inability for the guy on Pennsylvania Avenue to keep athletes' names out the mouth. And, now there's this discussion after every championship. Is this team going to go? Well, of course, the NHL team is going to go. The NASCAR team is going to go. But the football team from Philly isn't. Or the basketball team from California isn't. And it's become this, it's impossible to separate these two anymore. It's impossible.
The funny thing about that is, I just wrote a column about, why the Capitals shouldn't be the team that, should be hailed as going, given that they only have 7 Americans on the team.
Yeah.
If we're going to make this about patriotism and sing the anthem and have, military out there and release spoons and have cake and apple pie and cupcakes, and this is a great day for America, why are you so giddy to have a team that has a Russian superstar and only 7 Americans come, on your front lawn?
Yeah.
That's kind of backwards.
Who are the athletes that you see out there today that are true activists?
Man. I love it. Of course, you got to love what LeBron's doing. I love what Carmelo's doing. I know he was in the Bronx the other day with that situation that happened in New York. KD's been doing, I know he's been giving back. I was actually listening to the Breakfast Club interview this morning with Michael Bennett. I know his book's getting ready to come out. He's done some things. Chris Long has done some things. I am very and I have been leading the charge in my criticism of Malcolm Jenkins.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up because I was just about to ask you what you thought about Malcolm Jenkins' place in all this.
I have called him a sellout in columns and brought him to task on social media. And it's everything that guy has done in going to meetings and meeting with lawmakers and legislature and owning a Papa John's in Philly and giving people a job. I tip my cap to Malcolm Jenkins for that stuff. But this thing with taking the money and then refusing to raise your fist is part of taking the money.
Yeah.
And then you come out a couple of weeks ago and you're holding these signs up at your locker. And then you all just wrote this op-ed for the New York Times where you're talking about peaceful protests. And I'm like, dude, in the first paragraph, they're talking about awareness. And I'm like, you stopped the one thing you were doing to bring awareness about this every Sunday.
Yeah.
And I don't get it with him. And I know I've been reading multiple stories and columns of people been asking him about the criticism he's received. And I think it's rightful. And I've had friends I know, colleagues in the industry are like, I think you may be being a little tough on him. I think you're a little too hard on him. And I'm like, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
Because he chose to be the leader of this players coalition. And he became the head of this when Kaepernick and Reed decided to break off for them. And I'm like, those were the first two guys kneeling. Those are the two guys without a job. If they're breaking off from this, well, then someone should be like, something is wrong with what we're doing right now if those two guys want to leave. Like, let's recalibrate, let's regroup, let's come together, let's re-strategize, let's figure something out. Because if those two guys leave, something is wrong. And when they leave and you take this money and your fist comes out, I have a problem with that. And I'm going to tell you I have a problem with that.
And
because something about that just looks wrong and really, really funny to me.
Yeah, and that text message, there's a text message that Howard Bryant references in his book, The Heritage, that he reads verbatim, and it's from Malcolm Jenkins to the Players Coalition, where it pretty much says exactly what you just said. Hey, guys, we're looking at getting some funding from the owners. Should we get this amount that we're looking for? Would that be an end to the demonstrations? And you hear and you read that, and you're like, oh, man.
And I literally wrote a column, and I think my headline was, did the players did Colin Kaepernick's protest get pimped out for $100 million check? And it's like, it did.
Yeah.
Like, y'all literally took the money. Y'all took the hush money. They literally said, stop kneeling. You, the main guy, put your fist down and we'll give you this check. And you said, okay.
Yeah.
And then you're like, people are criticizing me.
Yeah.
I'm criticizing your actions. That was a choice that you did. You're a grown man. You got to live with that.
Because we already got the two faces of the protest out the league altogether. We just want you to put your fist down.
Exactly. And it's like, y'all didn't see this coming. And then when the anthem policy came, they were all like, oh, my God, I can't believe this happened. And I'm like, how didn't you see this happen? Y'all have been getting played at every step of this game. Like, you keep falling for the jab and the right hook is coming. Why don't you know the right hook is keep coming? That's because you don't duck the jab. Like, I don't get it. It's like, do you guys not watch boxing or like what? I don't understand.
I was going to say,
why they're so lost by this.
Y'all haven't been watching the fight film if you didn't know that was coming. You mentioned LeBron James, and LeBron absolutely should be commended for everything that he's doing, particularly when you're talking about the best in the business and you're only comparing him to one other guy, that guy being Michael Jordan. And we know where Michael Jordan stood, or, in his case, didn't stand on social issues. LeBron James has taken the exact opposite route. And in hindsight, with where we are today, isn't his reaction to Tamir Rice a really, really bad look?
That was I've been critical of LeBron once in my career. And I remember I was at the News Journal, Delaware Online, and I believe, like, if anyone's reading this, you can find it if you Google it. And I believe that the title of the column was "The Day LeBron James Let Black America Down," and it was when he was asked about the Tamir Rice situation. And I think it might have been during the finals or the playoffs, and I get it because we know when that guy locks in, he locks in. But I was like, dude, you're the face of that state in every single way. And we know how much you love your kids and kids in general because you just spent like $42 million out your pocket to send a whole bunch of kids to college. When you're asked about a 12-year-old boy that is like slaughtered in a park, you have to have an answer.
Yeah. And
that's the one time where I looked at LeBron James and I was just like totally disgusted for that week or couple of weeks because I was like, that is not good enough from you, given where you live and how old your kids are. Like, you should have been all over that. And since then, I've seen a change in him. And as he's spoken out about these things, especially what happened to his house in Brentwood and all of the stuff that's happened. And, like, LeBron's been perfect since then.
Yeah.
But that's a good point you bring up. That Tamir Rice thing, when it happened, that really bothered me.
Yeah, and it's just, and I pointed that out not to pick on LeBron, but just to one show how much he's grown since then. Because you mentioned that was in Cleveland.
Yeah,
Tamir was 12. Like there's no there's no rational explanation for what happened to that child, and for him to take that, and he took the response that you just laid out. Well, I got to find out more information about it. It's like, nah, you don't. Like you have it. Like you have all of the information right there in front of you, and then when you see that video in its entirety, man, with the sister, man,
yeah,
oh my gosh, there's that's something else. But again, I didn't bring that up to pick on LeBron. He's doing fantastic things, but it was worth pointing out how much he has grown since that situation. You've been really generous with your time, man. I appreciate it. I want to make sure I point out and ask you about the latest piece that you got up for the New York Daily News regarding Jameis Winston. I had never read anything like that pertaining to a black quarterback. It's really interesting. You talked about the privilege that he has. Why do you think Jameis has gotten such a pass?
I do not know, and I've been having this conversation with people since that column went up because people have been asking me, and I'm like, I wish I had the answer. If there was like something in there that we took out, like I found the stat that he's like 18 or 20. I think he's like 18 and 27 as a starter, and I'm like, those numbers aren't awesome. If you watch Hard Knocks, and you watch some of the interactions he had with his teammates and the things his coaches was trying to get him to do better or to change as a passer and as a quarterback, and all the little incidents he's had from Florida State to now. And as someone who he always, he claims and he loves being from Alabama, I'm always just like, James, you are at the end of the day, you are a little black boy from Alabama. You know better. You know how to act. You know who you are. You know how you're viewed. You know what to do and what not to do. And it just seems like every year or every other year, there is some Jameis Winston story where Jameis Winston does or is accused of doing something vile, or he just does something really, really dumb. And the common denominator of all these situations is Jameis Winston. And if Jameis Winston was white, and Jameis Winston was a Hall of Fame quarterback and he had Super Bowl rings, I would be like, oh, well, he's white, or he's rich, or he's a Hall of Famer, or he's a great quarterback. But he doesn't have the normal things that comes along with privilege. Like, he is the anti-face of what privilege should look like, but yet somehow he keeps getting these chances, and I'm completely lost by how he's reached this level of privilege that looks like a Teflon bodysuit, because, like, nothing seems to stick to this guy. And all accounts, it looks like once this suspension officially comes down, like the Bucs may do something, but it doesn't seem like the Bucs are going to release him or cut him. Like, he's still going to be the face of their franchise. And I still don't understand how this has happened. Now, I know some people can look at this and like, maybe this is progress. Maybe black people can still get the kind of privileges other white people can. But at some point, when you think about that, the majority of this stuff has the majority of his privilege has been revealed because of vile and disgusting things he allegedly may have or may not have done to women. Like, that's really bothersome and problematic to me.
You brought up Hard Knocks, and I had mentioned on my sports radio show how annoyed I am with myself because I fell for it. Like, I was watching it.
And you fell for the Jameis?
I did.
You fell for the fake Ray Lewis speeches he loves to give? Like, you fell for that?
Well, okay. Now, wait a minute now. I didn't fall for the speeches. In fact, I thought the speeches were the stupidest part of Jameis Winston, when he started, licking his fingers, talking about his fingers are hot wings.
God. Like, but you got it. That started in Florida State. Remember when they won a national title and he was with Tom Rinaldi on the field? And I told him, this is our moment. Y'all strong. We strong together. And I'm just like, dude, stop.
Yeah.
Stop. You didn't actually say that to a room of 115, 19-year-olds because that doesn't work. Stop. You didn't say that. Yeah. Come on. But but you fell for the you drank the James juice and you fell for it?
Man, because it looked like he had taken accountability. He looked to me like a leader. Now, I understand that the coaches have final cut of that, and a lot of that is coming off the year before when I don't remember if they were Los Angeles or St. Louis, but it was the Rams, and the Rams had painted Jared Goff to be a clown through the first half of that Hard Knocks season. They just painted him out to be
Jared Goff turned into looking like the next star of the league.
Right. They had painted him to be so stupid. So I went into here like, okay, with Tampa Bay, they're either going to make Jameis the star or they're going to stay away from him. So I was watching it closely, and they edited it cleverly, and yep, I fell for it, man. I'll take it. I own it. Like, I fell for it. That's my fault.
See, what you forgot was that with the Rams, there's this dude involved named Jeff Fisher.
Ugh.
And whenever Jeff Fisher is involved, things aren't going to go well.
Indeed. Quarterback death. Quarterback death. I was reading Very Smart Brothers. They called Coming to America the best black movie of all time.
I saw that this morning.
You agree?
Like once again, how is this even like a debate? Like, why are we even discussing this? The debate should be what's the second best black movie of all time.
Does Black Panther, does that qualify? Is that a black movie?
Yes, but listen, Black Panther can go at 2.
Okay.
Behind Coming to America. I like my top 5 is going to consist of. I'm going to have Boomerang at 3.
Really?
Probably going to have 5 Heartbeats at 4. Love Jones at 5.
Boomerang over. Well, I guess Beverly Hills Cop isn't a black movie. It's just a black star.
Boomerang is.
Okay.
I have a 40-inch Marcus Graham poster on my wall. Like, listen, from the soundtrack to the acting, like Boomerang is legitimately one of the best 5-10 movies in cinematic history.
And it's highly quotable. Like,
thank you.
If you can go a week without saying Marcus, darling, or bang, 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 you
exactly.
Yeah, that's a highly quotable movie. That's fair. I'll take that. I'll take Boomerang.
Also, like the hidden stars in that movie. Like, I think that's Chris Rock's first movie is Boney T. Uh-huh. That's the first time we saw Martin and Gina besides House Party in a movie. And then I think that was right before Martin got his show.
That was Hallie's first movie. Was that Hallie's first movie?
No, her first movie was Jungle Fever.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
But yeah, like you had peak Robin Givens.
Oh my gosh.
At that time, because I personally believe that Boomerang and Blank Man Robin Givens is the most beautiful woman in the history of the world.
Hey, hold on. Vivica Fox, yeah. Independence Day.
Nah. Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
Come on, man.
Go back and watch. Go back and watch Jacqueline Browder.
Okay.
As the advertising and marketing director of Lady Eloise.
Lady Eloise.
Beauty products.
It's Lady Eloise. Carron, man, this was a blast, bro. I can't thank you enough for joining us, man. We're gonna have to do this again.
Oh, definitely. And before we go, I have to say something.
Yeah.
As a proud Duke basketball fan, you are out in Sacramento. If Harry Giles is completely healed and you guys have Marvin Bagley, dear Sacramento Kings, do not mess this up for us, please.
Okay.
Please, guys.
See, now hold on.
This is going to go either really bad or this could be like the new front court of the future. So just please, from Duke fans everywhere, I'm going to speak for us. Please don't mess this up, guys.
So let me jump on this real quick because we had you're a Duke fan. We had former assistant, current head coach at Pitt, Jeff Capel, on last week, the day after the draft.
Shout out to Capel at Pitt because that's a hard place to coach. With what's going on there. Shout out to Capel. God be with you, Cape.
That dude has been watching those two players that you just mentioned since they were in ninth grade, and he couldn't have possibly spoken higher of both, Marvin Bagley III and Harry Giles as well. So I want to put that out there. But how are you just going to throw out, after starting the show, being a Fab Five guy to being a Duke fan, how are you just going to throw that out there and expect me not to follow up?
Oh, you can follow up because, my story is rock solid.
Okay.
The Fab Five is my favorite team. But my favorite college player of all time is Jason Williams. because I remember as growing up, there was a random Saturday and nothing was on TV except this Duke game. And because like I'm going to be honest with full transparency, I was a Carolina fan at one point because in my household, my dad had me cheering for all the black teams growing up as a kid. Okay, I had like all the Georgetown sweaters because in that era, let's go back to the 80s and 90s. Every black man over 30 cheered for Georgetown because John Thompson was there, and they had all the brothers. So when I was a kid, they gave me Georgetown sweatshirts, and I cheered for Georgetown because that's what my dad and my uncle said. Then the Fat Five came when I got old enough to like a team, and it was all these black dudes, and they had on long shorts and black socks, and I was like, yeah, and they went to Michigan. That's great. But then you got to also remember, going back to Charlie Scott, older black men really loved North Carolina because Charlie Scott broke that color barrier in the ACC. Mm-hmm. So I had uncles down here in Atlanta and all over who loved Carolina. So they're watching the game. I'm watching them too, and J.R. Reed and all these guys. So I'm like, cool. I'm following everything that the men in my family have followed. But then when I got old enough to, like, pick a team because I liked them, I just remember a day there was no other game on but a Duke game, and I was bored at home, and there was this freshman on the court, number 22, and I was like, who is that dude? And it was Jason Williams. And it started as, who is he? He's kind of good. To every time they came on, I watched that dude. And then before I knew it, I was all in.
And to not confuse Sacramento Kings fans that might be listening, Jason Williams, the current Jay Williams, the broadcaster. Not white chocolate, not the one from the Nets who might have killed somebody. Duke, the one on ESPN, that Jason Williams. Yeah, that one. An amazing college career too.
Listen, man, it's one of the as a Duke fan, listen, Jason Williams' motorcycle accident, Bobby Hurley's car accident, Kyrie's toe, Grant Hill's ankles and knees in the NBA. Like, we're 4 injuries away from that stereotype of Duke guys aren't good in the league from being Duke guys are great in the league. Yeah. And it's all not their fault either. But please, guys, Harry and Marvin, take care of them. Please.
So now you've kind of changed the game a little bit because now we got to have you on the sports show during the basketball season.
Listen, call me as much as needed, okay? But just make sure that Harry's knees are okay. Like, take him to church, baptize his knees, wrap him in holy oil, whatever you need to do. Put a bubble around Marvin, make sure he's okay. Please teach him how to play defense because he does not know how to play defense at all. Trust me, it's going to frustrate you all. I know it frustrated me all season, but if those two guys are fully healthy, listen, that with De'Aaron Fox, and if Buddy Hield can be Buddy Hield from Oklahoma, and you got Willie Cauley-Stein as your rim protector, listen, you guys have something. I would love to play with this team on the old NBA Live 95 because they would be, like, unbeatable.
There you go, Sega Genesis. Thank you, my man. I really appreciate it. You've been more than generous with your time. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
That is Carron J. Phillips of the New York Daily News, man. That was a fun conversation. I really wasn't expecting the shout-out to the Sacramento Kings there at the end, but great stuff from him. I want to mention also, if you head over to my Twitter account, at Damien Barling, I tweeted the article that Carron was referencing regarding LeBron James. Now, remember, this article is old. He wrote this following what happened to Tamir Rice, and LeBron James was reluctant to comment on it, more than reluctant to comment on it, which is a far cry from where he is now, which is why I thought it was worth, pointing that out. As LeBron James' free agency gets ready to get underway, he has openly acknowledged that the decision was a bad mistake. I'm curious if he ever does a lengthy sit-down, if he'll ever acknowledge, or if he even thinks that his reaction to the Tamir Rice shooting in Cleveland was the wrong one. And again, it was just a few short years ago, but the landscape, the political landscape, and the social issue landscape involving the NBA, sports in general, and just America has completely changed. So, again, really appreciate you tuning in. Thank you so much. If you're not familiar with what I do Monday through Friday, I host The Lowdown. It's a sports talk show. You can catch it again Monday through Friday on Sports 1140 AM if you're listening in Northern California. You can also download our station's app, the KHTK app. You can even search The Lowdown, Damien, Barling, and Jason Ross here in the same podcast platform that you're listening to this show. So if you're outside of Sacramento or outside of the Northern California area, that's what all those references were to the Sacramento Kings there at the end. If you like what you're listening to, if this is your first time listening, welcome. We really appreciate having you. Hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. If you think this show is worth the 5-star review, please go ahead and hit that 5-star review. As I mentioned when the show started, it really does help us get noticed across podcast platforms, whether it's iTunes. We've got a really good rating, a really good number of reviews coming in on iTunes, and the more it's reviewed, the more it's listened to, the more it gets noticed, the more it's get publicized, and this thing will just continue to grow. Refer it to friends, share it on social media. You can find me again at Damien Barling on Twitter. If you're on Instagram, the podcast has its own Instagram account at BeConsciousPod. Or if you just want to send me some feedback, good or bad, dbarling@saclocalmedia.com. Most people don't want change. They're comfortable and set in their ways. But in order to change, you have to be able to agitate people at times. And I think that's something that's very necessary for us to improve as a country. That's Colin Kaepernick. I'm Damien Barling. We'll see you next week.